Really delighted to introduce our next panelist, Jennifer Smith Turner. Jennifer is truly a quadruple threat in terms of the impact that she has had on society as a business executive, as a government official, working with nonprofits, former CEO of the Girl Scouts of Connecticut, also former CEO of Newman's own foundation, as well as a member of the CECP board. And beyond those three areas of major institutions, she is also an accomplished poet and now novelist. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Daryl. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for that intro as well. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for writing that for me, Jennifer. No, we put that on our own, but really, it's really wonderful. Just the number of different groups and institutions that Jennifer has really touched. Mm-hmm. Jennifer, a lot going on in the world these days. You've grown up in this world. How have some of the experience that you've had that you can share with our audience as we kind of talk about what's going on and some of the thoughts that you have, and perhaps some of even the experiences you've dealt with over the past your lifetime?
Sure. Well, what an amazing time on so many levels in terms of what's going on in the world. And it's interesting because in my novel, one of the scenes that I address is the point in time when Emmett Till is murdered down in Mississippi. And in writing that and then looking at the world today, what strikes me and everyone who reads the book is, oh my goodness, kind of the same things are happening. What's going on with us? So it's sad to think about that. And, in terms of my own experience, as you said, I've worked in so many sectors over the years, and I started, in the corporate world and the business world in about the mid 70s is when I started. And some of the things that I heard then that I still hear now, and here's one of them, and maybe some of the members will want to talk about this, is, well, if there were simply more in the pipeline, people would be in positions in the organizations and they would be at the table. That was back in 1974. It's impossible that between now and 2020 and almost 2021, that the pipeline hasn't been filled. So it's discouraging, it's exhausting in some respects. But at the same time, and as I will still say, is that I'm forever hopeful. I'm forever hopeful.
Yeah.
We'll find our way.
Right. Now, is your sense, and we talked some before, is this just another moment, or do you think this is becoming a movement?
I do believe this is a movement. And when I look back at, I'll use Emmett Till sort of as that anchor, but the whole civil rights movement, the Montgomery March, it's all of that. I think this is very much, and I think what makes this a movement is the breadth and the depth of it. I mean, it is worldwide that people are standing up in all parts to say enough already of whatever and whomever you are. If you're feeling that type of oppression that people, the Black Lives Matter, are talking about, it's like, come on, let's stop it. So I think it's a movement, and in all walks of life, people who were before had not want to risk their position. I think I'm thinking about celebrities and athletes, people in positions of power who simply said, I actually do have some power because of my celebrity and because of my position, and maybe I should use that for the good. So I believe we're in a movement, and a very important movement in the history of this country.
Sure. Any sense of what makes this different from your perspective? Why this time these were not George Floyd was not the first murdered?
No, well, some people say it's because of the pandemic, because people were bored, and I agree with the first part, but not the second. I think it very much is because of what's happening with COVID-19 and the pandemic, but not because people are bored, but because when you're forced to stand still, when you're not being bombarded with, I've got to compete, I've got to rush, I've got to get there, when all of that goes away and suddenly it's quiet, you see what's in front of you.
Right.
And that's what this moment has created. People see what's in front of them. The rush of everyday life, you would not have seen it as clearly. This made it very clear.
Okay. That's good to hear. One of our CEOs has said, Barb Humpton from Siemens, also on our CECP board, has said everybody wants to do something now. Whether it was COVID or racial justice and others, people want to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think there is that sense, very much so.
So, given your own experiences, what we're seeing now, what do companies need to do? Where do they step up to make this move from a moment to a movement? Thoughts from that, your perspective?
Sure. Well, I think for companies, it's looking at this the same way they would look at any other business problem, because it is a business problem, it is a social problem. So what do you do if you want to enter a new market? If you want to bring a new product to market, you bring the resources to bear to make that happen. You do your research, you do your analysis, you bring the right people, you put money behind it, and you work at it, and you have goals that you've established.
Right.
So I would say to companies, treat this the exact same way. This is an opportunity and a challenge. It's a business issue for you. Deal with it as such. It's not an emotional issue, because I don't think emotional issues maintain their momentum. This is a business issue. And so treat it that way and address what is it you want to accomplish when it comes to social equity and racial equity, both within your organization and within the larger community where you live and work and where your employees and your customers live and work. What is it you want to accomplish? What do you want to be known for? Set out your goals and make it happen like you make everything else happen to succeed in your business.
Sure. That's an interesting piece, the notion that, emotion gets you going, but emotions are often moments, right?
Yes.
And you really need that business case to make it a movement. And
Absolutely.
the numbers are kind of clear, I think, in terms of, kids of color today who are millennials, 40% of the population,
Right.
50% if we look at Gen Z. So those are your future customers, your future employees, and certainly your communities today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. How do we hold companies accountable? What are the opportunities that you see that can really help us to kind of think about companies and ask, say, okay, we have at CECP hundreds of statements that companies have made. How do we take that to the next level to action?
Well, I mean, it'd be interesting to go into some of those companies and talk to their employees and get their reaction to those statements.
Yes.
and how you live those statements. Because what I always say is that, when you look at whether it's institutional racism or systemic racism or sexism or any of that, it really has to do with your immediate supervisor. It's a series of immediate supervisors' behaviors is what creates the culture that one person experiences. So if I happen to have a really bad supervisor, then my experience in that company is that this is an awful company, and that all those platitudes they put out there are meaningless because this was my experience in that company. So I think talking to your employees and asking that question, how do we live, and are we living these missions and these statements and these commitments? And if we're not, what do we need to do differently? But I think the answer lies within the organization. That's what, and not in the C-suite.
Right. Yeah.
Not in the C-suite. The answer is at the front level of the organization. Yeah. It really is.
Because often we hear the CEO, the C-suite kind of gets it.
Right.
At least the lip service there, et cetera.
Right.
We hear the millennials and the employees, younger employees kind of get it, but it's getting that middle management really engaged to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It really is.
Any thoughts and strategies you have and how you've seen companies effectively get that middle management group engaged? We talked about the business case. Are there other ways to do so?
I'll tell you an experience I had, which is not exactly on point, but one of my world of work was with city government. And I left the corporate world to work in city government. And I was so struck to hear people sitting around the table in city government talking about how you need to hire people. And the hiring was focused on who your constituents were. And of course, in politics, and this was my first foray into real politics. Right. In politics, people get my constituents. I mean, they understand their constituents no matter what they're made of. And so people sat around this table one night when we were talking about hiring people, and they said, well, we have so many Hispanics, we have so many Blacks, we have so many this, so many in this neighborhood. So we need one here, we need two there. And I was stunned because I'd never heard a corporate world have a conversation like that. Right. It was so clear. And I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but my point is that it was so clear in understanding if this is our constituents, we need to talk about what they look like and who they are and what their needs are. And then we need to be externally focused and then internally aligned. Okay. And I think government got that. And again, sometimes we see that in not good ways, but government gets that.
Right. Yes.
Right. But I think there's something for the business sector to understand that we really need to be externally focused. What do your neighborhoods look like? What do your customers look like? Where are your employees coming from? And then look inside your organization. Do you at all resemble that? And if you don't,
Sure.
you need to do something.
Right. I love that term of externally focused,
Mhm.
understand your communities and others, your customer base, employees, but internally aligned so you can really
Right.
get things done.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, we could go on for days. I will recommend the book, A Child Bride.
Thank you.
Jennifer just penned. I've read through it. Really a wonderful story of Black woman growing up in
Mhm.
mid-century America. It's a great read, and it's relevant, I think, to today's times, as you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, dear. I appreciate it.